The old farmhouse at the edge of Silver Hollow had always been a point of quiet fascination in town. It was the kind of place stories clung to, thick with generations of superstition and whispered fear. Officially, it had been abandoned for decades, yet the rumors said no one truly left the farmhouse. The stories varied. Children claimed they saw faces staring out of the darkened windows, while the elderly swore the air around it carried the smell of decay, no matter the season. No one dared approach it, except Alex. Alex wasn't a skeptic, not exactly, but after losing his father that year, the gnawing grief inside him turned curiosity into obsession. His father had been full of secrets, and among the paperwork left behind was an unsigned letter, an ominous warning written in trembling ink: "Stay away from the sleeper." Once awoken, it never rests. There had been no explanation, no further mention of who, or what, the sleeper was. But to Alex, it felt tied to the farmhouse, to Silver Hollow. Something about that letter and its ominous tone had planted a seed in his mind, one that grew in the dark corners of his thoughts. On a frigid December night, armed with a flashlight, a crowbar, and little else, Alex found himself standing at the farmhouse's porch. The air had that unnatural stillness, the kind where even the wind seemed scared to whisper. The porch groaned under his boots, its wood soft with age. The front door wasn't locked, it yawned open at his touch, the hinges letting out a long, low cry like a warning too late. Alex hesitated, one foot inside and the other poised to retreat, before stepping fully inside. The house smelled faintly of wet earth and something sour. The walls seemed too close despite the wide-open room beyond the doorway. Light from his flashlight slid across peeling wallpaper, water stains shaped like malformed faces, and furniture covered in sheets sagging like deflated ghosts. Alex wasn't entirely sure what he expected to find. He didn't believe in ghosts, but the stories his dad used to tell always hinted at things beyond comprehension, things no one could see but everyone could feel. Upstairs was where he first heard it. A low, rhythmic hum. Not mechanical, but organic, like distant breathing. At first, Alex thought it might be the house settling. But as he stood there, flashlight aimed at the staircase, the sound didn't stop. If anything, it grew clearer. Climbing the steps felt like walking through a tunnel. The closer he got to the top, the louder and warmer the air became, though the warmth felt wrong. It wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. The hallway at the top of the stairs stretched out longer than the house's outside dimensions should have allowed. Doors lined both sides, all closed, but each seemed slightly off. They were too narrow, almost as though they were made for someone not human. And above them, faint etchings marked each frame, strange symbols with jagged edges that burned into Alex's memory the more he stared. His flashlight flickered, the beam weakening. He swore under his breath but pressed on. At the end of the hall was a single door different from the rest. No markings, no distortions, just an old wooden door, partially ajar, with the faintest flicker of light leaking out. Inside, the air felt alive, like a deep ocean pressing on Alex's chest. The source of the humming sat at the room's center, a bed, no, a slab, weathered and smooth. Something massive and barely visible lay atop it, cloaked in shadows so thick the flashlight beam seemed to slip away from it. It was breathing. Slow, deliberate, shuddering breaths that pulled the room's stale air inward before exhaling something far colder. Alex felt ice bloom in his lungs, his breath fogging the second he stepped closer. Then it spoke. "Do you hear me, little one?" The voice didn't come from the slab but from everywhere at once. It carried the weight of centuries, a deep resonance that vibrated in Alex's teeth and ribs. He took a step back, but his legs refused to obey further. "I've waited so long. For your family. What are you?" Alex stammered, clutching the crowbar tightly. "I am the sleeper," the voice whispered, each syllable curling around him like a coiled snake. "And your father knew better than to come. But he was weak in the end. What did you do to him?" Alex shouted, though his voice wavered. "I fed," the sleeper replied, dragging the word out into a sigh. As I will feed on you. The room seemed to expand outward, the walls peeling back into darkness. On the slab, the massive form stirred, revealing the faint outline of limbs too long and thin to be human. Its torso swelled with each breath, shifting under pale skin that glistened like wet stone. A flash of movement broke the spell. From a corner of the room came a dry rasp, another voice. Weak, frantic. Alex. Run. Don't listen to it. He spun, the flashlight illuminating a gaunt figure in the corner. His father. Emaciated, chained to the wall, eyes sunken and wide with terror. You don't belong here, leave. The sleeper groaned, a sound that made Alex's knees buckle. Do not lie to him, mortal. He belongs more than you ever did. Don't believe it, his father shrieked, tears cutting through the grime on his face. The sleeper's massive limbs began to move. Its breath quickened, and Alex felt something wrap around his mind, a seeping, probing presence that tore through his thoughts. Images flashed before him, the farmhouse devouring families, children vanishing, blood soaking into the earth. Each image burned with the same truth: this place wasn't haunted. It was alive. The sleeper wasn't just in the house, it was the house. The walls, the floors, the air, all of it was part of the entity that slept here, feeding on fear, siphoning life. Come closer, child, the sleeper murmured, a sickly sweet compulsion laced in its tone. Alex took a step forward, not of his own volition. The crowbar fell from his grip. His father's voice was distant now, drowned out by the crescendo of humming, the pulsing pull of the sleeper's voice. He could feel the house closing in, breathing in rhythm with the thing on the slab. In a desperate surge, Alex broke free from the pull and lunged for his father's chains. But before his hands reached the cold iron, a tendril, fleshy, pale, and reeking of decay, shot out from the sleeper, wrapping around his arm and yanking him back. You will stay, it hissed. As Alex screamed, his father cried out one final warning. It never lets you leave. Burn it, burn the house. The flashlight, forgotten on the ground, flickered its last. Darkness swallowed everything but the sound of the sleeper's laugh, an ancient, guttural sound, echoing through the eternal void of its cursed halls. And then, the farmhouse fell silent again, waiting for its next visitor. It was Christmas Eve, and snow fell in soft, silent flurries, blanketing the small town of Dunridge in pristine white. The streets were empty, the houses glowing warmly with lights and garlands. Leah sat curled in her armchair, a blanket draped around her as she stared at the fire. It would be her first Christmas alone since her parents passed. The ache of their absence weighed heavily on her, but she promised herself she'd honor their traditions, decorate the tree, sip hot cocoa, and, as her dad always said, listen for the carolers. Around midnight, just as Leah was preparing to go to bed, she heard the faint sound of singing outside. Silent night, holy night. Her heart lifted, a spark of holiday cheer piercing through her grief. She hurried to the window, pushing aside the curtains. A group of carolers stood just beyond her front gate, bundled against the cold, their faces obscured by scarves and hats. There were 5 of them, 2 women, 3 men, singing in perfect harmony. Leah smiled. It had been years since carolers had come down her street. She grabbed her coat and gloves, eager to thank them. But as she opened the door, the song stopped abruptly. The group stood still, too still. Their faces remained hidden, but Leah felt their eyes on her, sharp and unblinking. Merry Christmas, she called out, her breath forming a mist in the icy air. Your singing was lovely. The tallest of the group, a man in a long, dark coat, took a step forward. The gate creaked open on its own as he approached, though Leah hadn't seen him touch it. Thank you, he said, his voice low and formal. May we come in? The question hit her strangely. Carolers didn't ask to come inside, did they? Leah hesitated, her hand gripping the edge of the door. I don't think so, she replied. It's late, and I was just about to head to bed. The man didn't respond. The others behind him shifted slightly, their movements stiff, unnatural. Then one of the women started humming, the sound twisting into an eerie mimicry of their previous song. Sleep in heavenly peace. Leah took a step back. Something was wrong. The warmth of her house suddenly felt thin, and a sharp chill swept through the doorway. I think you should go, she said, her voice faltering. The man stepped closer. We've traveled a long way, he said, his tone still calm, almost apologetic. We only need a moment to rest. No, Leah said firmly, her instincts screaming now. You can't come in. His head tilted slightly, as if studying her. Oh, but we can. Leah slammed the door and locked it, her hands trembling. The fire flickered behind her, casting long shadows. Outside, the humming grew louder, joined by soft, rhythmic tapping on the windows. She turned to see them standing in the snow, circling her house, their faces still obscured but their heads tilted unnaturally. Their silhouettes seemed taller, their bodies wrong somehow, as though they weren't entirely human. Then the singing began again, louder this time, echoing unnaturally, round yon virgin, mother and child. Leah stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. The fire flickered again, dimming to a weak glow. Let us in, Leah, a voice whispered from the chimney. She whipped around, staring at the hearth. How do you know my name? The voice didn't answer, but the singing outside grew chaotic, overlapping verses and discordant notes filling the air. The shadows on the wall twisted, taking shapes that writhed and reached toward her. Desperate, Leah grabbed her phone to call for help, but the screen flickered and died, her battery inexplicably drained. The tapping on the windows turned to pounding, the glass rattling as if it might shatter at any moment. Leave me alone, she screamed. A chorus of laughter erupted, low and guttural, reverberating through the walls. The front door rattled violently, and then came the man's voice again, calm and icy. You invited us, Leah. When you opened the door. No, I didn't, she yelled, backing into the corner of the room. But deep down, she realized with cold horror that she had. The moment she opened the door and spoke to them, she'd given them permission, an old, forgotten rule of the supernatural her father had once warned her about in one of his bedtime stories. The pounding stopped. For a moment, the house was deathly silent. Leah held her breath, clutching the edge of the fireplace poker as a makeshift weapon. And then the man was inside. He stood in the center of the room, snow melting on his long coat, his face still obscured. Behind him, the others stepped through the walls as if they were liquid, their forms rippling and unnatural. You should never open the door on Christmas Eve, the man said, his voice soft now, almost gentle. Not after midnight. That is our time. Leah screamed as they advanced, their forms stretching and twisting, limbs elongating unnaturally. The last thing she saw was their faces, pale and featureless, their mouths impossibly wide, filled with rows of jagged, gleaming teeth. The next morning, the townspeople found Leah's house quiet and empty. The fire had burned down to cold ash, and the untouched presents still lay beneath the tree. The only clue was the front door, which hung open, snow blowing inside. And in the snow outside, 5 sets of footprints circled the house, before vanishing entirely. Love these stories? YouTube algorithm suggests that you would like to listen to these stories. Click on the video on the screen.